Hey, there we go. Welcome back to Virtual Dev Intersection. How's it going there? Mr. Richard Campbell is here, and my name is Jeff Fritz. How you doing there, friend?
I am well, friend, and we just saw each other in Sweden not a week ago. So how's the jet lag?
Oh my goodness, the jet lag is, I think we're through this. We're back on East Coast time for me and you, West Coast Pacific time.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. And we're getting ready for another conference coming up here.
Yeah. So section, April 6th to 8th. Kind of got all the ducks in a row now. Schedule's been published, and we're getting out there talking to different folks. And an epic list of keynotes, starting with the person we're going to talk to today.
Oh my gosh. The keynotes for Dev Intersection have been just kicking up in scale from one event to the next. And I'm thrilled that we can bring on here. Let me bring him on now. Here's Donovan Brown. Hey, Donovan.
How are you guys doing?
Oh my gosh. So good to see you, my friend. And you've been doing a lot lately. My gosh, I'm not joking around when I say that you've got a lot to talk about and show the audience here at Dev Intersection coming up, right?
Oh, I do. It's I always say this every year, and every year I guess it's true. It's the most ambitious and technically deep demo I've ever done. It's to the point where I'm gonna have to cut it down to make it fit in an hour.
There's something to be said for having too much content, right? That's a good problem to have.
It is. I start with no slides, right? I literally just, here's Donovan, and then I go until you tell me to stop. And I could go probably as long as you'd want me to go. There's so much in Azure to show. And what we're going to be talking about is how you take a brownfield application, which a lot of our customers have today in their own data centers, and how easily we make it to lift and shift that into Azure, and all the amazing things you can do with the app once it's in the cloud, right? The point of moving it to the cloud is to be able to do things that you weren't able to do when you're on-prem, being able to scale up and scale out your infrastructure at the click of a button, being able to add AI with as little as 3 lines of code, being able to take advantage of this PaaS offering to where servers, they're a thing of the past as far as you're concerned. You're no longer setting update patches. You're no longer rebooting servers. You're not dealing with any of that stuff, right? You're just worrying about the app in which you want to deploy and deliver, and the rest is handled by Microsoft. So that's exactly what the demo does. I get on stage, I introduce you to this existing brownfield app that's running locally on my laptop for these purposes here. It has a MongoDB, it has a SQL Server database, it has some microservices, and it has a front end. And what we do is we move that into the cloud, right there. I'll show you how to migrate your database, your Mongo, into Cosmos. I'll show you how to track your cost, how to make sure that everything's secure, how to add Power Apps to an existing application, how to make sure that you're using Security Center and you're compliant. It's just amazing what we were able to do. And we take you through that entire journey, and we move this app into the cloud and do some fun stuff with it.
When you're talking to customers about these kinds of moves, is this primarily for outward-facing apps or purely internal apps?
That's a good question. Majority of them are their .coms, right? These are their customer-facing applications, but everything that I'm going to describe to you can also be done for any internal back office things. We have some new services coming out in Azure where you can actually use PaaS, like app service, but only inside your firewall, right? So we're going to give you that so you don't have to expose that public IP anymore. There's some shows I just recorded on Azure Friday where we were talking about just that. I don't want to have to spin up a VM to run a website for back office stuff, because I can put that inside of my VNet. I want to put an app service inside of my VNet and only let people inside of my actual private network see that. And we can do that now. So you take all the advantages of PaaS, and you don't have to use it only for public-facing websites. You can do everything I'm going to say for your internal back office stuff as well.
And I also think, folks that are just sort of embracing that idea of, what do I want to move to the cloud? What's going to give me the biggest advantage? Might want to start small too. Like, it's pretty tricky to grab a marquee revenue generating app and say, let's re-engineer this.
That's a good point. Re-engineering is not always a requirement. So right. Yes, if you're going to have to re-engineer the application, you probably want to start off with something small and get your feet wet. But we have so many options to move your brownfield application into the cloud. There's many times where you don't have to rewrite anything, right? Look at PaaS. Like app service. App service is probably one of my favorite features of Azure. It's so, just imagine that you have a virtual directory. That's it. Doesn't matter if you want to run a WAR file that used to run inside of Apache. It doesn't matter if you want to run a .NET app that used to run inside of IIS. If you have the same exact binaries that you were using on your local web server, you can take those exact binaries without packaging them differently, without figuring out what Docker is and just move them directly into app service, and that app will just fire up. It's amazing how versatile app service actually is. What we see a lot of people doing, though, is they're over pivoting on, oh my goodness, containers are all the rage right now. We have to containerize everything. And that does take some learning, right? You got to learn what a Docker file is and understand how you do find all the different services and things like that, which, do I go to Kubernetes or do I not go to Kubernetes? Well, why are we debating this stuff when you just want to get your app off your VM and get it in the cloud? Like, let's just go to PaaS. We'll worry about that stuff later. So investigate every option the cloud gives you. Don't assume you have to go to containers just so you're going to the cloud. Right?
Is lift and shifting VMs that bad of an idea? Can I just pick up the app and move it if it's already living VMs and local?
That's a funny question. Like, is it a bad idea? I would not say it's a bad idea. However, I do not believe it's taking full advantage of the cloud, because when you have a VM spun up in Azure, you are still responsible for when the Windows updates need to happen. You are still responsible for running apt-get update on your Linux VMs to make sure that all the packages are up to date. You have to figure out, how am I going to reboot this machine so that all of the changes take effect, yet keep my customers happy so that they're using the site and not getting we're going to be down for maintenance on Tuesday at 4 o'clock in the morning. Please don't be, we'll be right back, while you're out there dealing with this.
Yes.
You do that because you're responsible for that machine. So lifting and shifting a VM is probably the easiest way to move, depending on how tricky your application is, because you might be using some edge conditions that simply do not port automatically over to app service. But we have actually a migration tool that will go look at your existing application and tell you, will you be able to move into app service with zero code changes, or will you have to make some modifications? If you don't have time for the modifications, you're absolutely right. We can just simply lift it and shift it into a VM, running the exact same operating system, running the exact same web server, and your app will work like it did on-prem. But all the things you hated about running a VM on-prem are true in the cloud too,
right?
As far as the maintenance. The thing that running in the cloud gives you is the ability to scale up or scale out so much faster than you would have on-prem, right? But I tell all my customers, if you want to lift and shift and go to a VM, knock yourself out. But do me a favor and do not get comfortable there, right? Immediately start figuring out, how do I take this app and put it into some PaaS services? Just like your SQL Server, right? Your SQL Server, you don't have to move and lift and shift that to a VM running SQL Server. You can move it into to Azure SQL now, right? And then again, you're not worried about maintaining the server and rebooting the server. You're just worried about delivering value to our end users. So PaaS, in my opinion, is the holy grail of the cloud. I do not want to know that there's servers back there. All I want to worry about is the value I want to deliver to my customers. And we have lots of ways to do that for you.
And
go ahead, buddy.
I was going to say, as a developer, when I approach and I look at all the Azure services out there, I don't want to be feeding and tuning and installing all of these things all the time. I'm a developer. Let me focus on writing code and get stuff into that Azure endpoint as quickly as possible, and at some point make that repeatable so that I can just keep putting it out there and let all the folks that manage Azure and are really good at doing that do their thing. Take care of my stuff for me.
Yeah, we have lots of extensions too. I'm obviously a DevOps guy, right? I'm all about making sure you have a nice pipeline that obviously that easily delivers the value to your users. But if you're a single developer, and Damian Brady's going to hate me when he hears me say this, that like we have extensions that let you right-click publish like right into the service. It's like you don't have to know anything about DevOps. If you I'm in a panic, I got to get this app off of this machine into Azure. You can right-click and publish out of Visual Studio. You can actually have extensions inside of there's an amazing set of extensions, which I will talk about in the demo as well, for Visual Studio Code. Like Visual Studio Code can pretty much target every asset inside of Azure now, to where you can say, I want a new function. It'll scaffold out a function for you, and then you can simply say deploy that function, and the next thing you know, that function is now running in Azure, which is amazing. Same thing with App Service. So you want to get out of the off on-prem and into the cloud as quickly as you can. We have extensions that'll let you do that. We also have DevOps projects inside of the portal, which you can say, hey, I want to do this repeatedly. I want to use DevOps best practices. And you can say, well, here's my repository, right? There's the resources I want to wire up. And then Azure will simply wire up a pipeline for you so that every time you commit to your repository, it'll automatically take that code and deploy it for you into the cloud. About that too.
I thought it was amazing. We took some time on another stream over on my channel, and we wired up a GitHub repository. Mm-hmm. Here's where I want to store my Docker container, and whenever Azure saw a commit to that GitHub container repository, it would pull and restart the service. Really easy to do.
Yeah, and we're trying to make it easier and easier. I remember a couple of years ago, people were asking, so Donovan, like, what's the future of DevOps? What do you want DevOps to be? I was like, well, I want DevOps to be what CI is now. It's a checkbox, right? Right now, we're all talking about how hard it is and what tools you need to go. Like, I remember when that was CI. I remember when getting a build machine set up was like, only the smartest guy on your team could set up your build server, right? Because it was so hard to do. And I remember sitting at Compact looking at make files and just being blown away by how these people were getting our code to build every time we checked it in. And now it's a given. And if I want CI, I just go to the repository and I check a box, right? And then all that hard stuff is just magic and it just works. I'm waiting for the day to where I was like, I need DevOps. Okay, great. I checked that box. And it's like, oh, yeah, great. I know what you have. I know where you can run it. And you have a Docker file. So you obviously want to do a Docker. I'm going to go ahead and store it in the registry for you. And I'm going to deploy it to where do you want to go? App service, Kubernetes, ACI. You tell me where you want to go. Done, right? That's what DevOps should be. And we're getting close, right? My wife's like, oh, you'll never get there. I'm like, nah, I think we will, right? Because I was writing Yo Team 5 years ago, however many years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a command line tool that pretty much did that, right? It's like not a checkbox, but clearly the APIs that we need, the heuristics that we needed to be able to analyze, they're there for us to be able to say, give me a repository, and I'll be able to wire up automatically for you a way for you to run it inside of Azure. So we're getting really close to just turning DevOps into a checkbox.
Nice.
Well, and in the end, that wasn't the job, right? Your job was to build software that helped people, and this should be plumbing. It should just work.
It should. And I tell people, too, that we do this in the wrong order a lot of times. People will not anticipate the difficulty in deploying their software until the software is done. And now all of a sudden you want to ship on this date. You're done on that date, but then you didn't realize of all the different things you're going to have to do to actually deploy that code into production. Like, why did you wait till the end? You could have literally built the pipeline before you wrote a single line of code. Now, you know you're going to be building .NET. You know how to compile that. You know how to package it. You know what tests you're going to run. You know where you're going to deploy it into Azure. You know what you're going to use infrastructure as code. Like, why didn't you build that first? And then all I would do is the very first commit would try to go to production, like the very first commit. And when we're done, that day, the code will simply be in production, ready to rock and roll. Like, that's the holy grail. Stop waiting till the end, because what I've also noticed is when people think about where are we actually going to be at the end, it sometimes impacts their architecture.
Sure.
Right? They start to think about, oh, are we actually going to do app service? Are we going to do a VM? Are we going to do Kubernetes? Okay, well, since we know we really know where we're going to go, let's go back and say, oh, I would change the way that we design this. Right now that I understand where we're intending to go, let's go back in and do this a little bit differently. So tools like Yo Team and the DevOps projects allow you to lay that highway to production first, and then just start committing code to your repository, and then don't even think about the plumbing anymore.
Is that the logical beginning for most of these projects? I'm looking at the existing app and deciding how I'm going to start, integrating into the cloud. Should I work out the pipeline first, or is there somewhere else to start?
I would start with whatever is the highest cost of your pipeline, because everyone has a pipeline, right? Mm-hmm. They might not have a automated pipeline, but everyone has a pipeline. Somehow your code gets from the developer's desktop into production. Now, however it gets there, that is your pipeline. It might be a lot of manual handoffs and emails and all sorts of stuff. What I would do is say, what is the slowest, high-risk portion of the current process we have today? Is it getting it built because some engineer has to stop what they're doing, get the latest version on their machine, make sure their machine is clean, and compile the code? If that's the part that takes the longest and introduces the most risk, and it does introduce a lot of risk, because the developer might not clean their machine just right. They might have a newer version of a DLL on it that's not in production. So when they compile it, it doesn't run in production, right? That's very risky. But if you had a CI machine that was completely clean and would only download the dependencies when it needed it and match what was going to be in production, if that's what's slowing you down, then I would focus on that one part first. Let's get a solid CI system in place. Great. Now we have a package that we can deploy much more consistently because it's the right versions, it's packaged correctly. Great. Then I would look at your system now. Okay, now that we have CI out of the way, what's the riskiest part? Well, it's actually not deployment. That's actually pretty easy because we have a PowerShell script to do that, but our quality is garbage. All right, let's figure out how to automate your testing. Yeah. Right, so people always think that you're going to do CI then CD. I'm like, well, you need to do what hurts the most first. And everyone's process is going to be slightly different depending on their experience, depending on their type of app, depending on their target environment. So what I tell everyone to do is don't try to build this entire pipeline from scratch if you've never done it before. Tools like Azure DevOps, tools like Yo Team, tools like the DevOps projects, those are going to help you because they already know how to lay that framework. But if you've never built a pipeline before, you trying to dream up or imagine that you understand how to do this, having never done it before, don't do that. because you're probably going to make assumptions that are wrong. Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
It's just too big of a bite, too.
It is. And then I don't want you, and a lot of people seem to say, okay, if I'm going to go do this, I need to stop what I'm doing, go learn all this stuff, go build this amazing pipeline. And because you've never done it before, there's a high likelihood that you're not going to get it right. And then you're going to have taken a month, 2 months to go figure this out, and then it not work. That's just a punch in the stomach, right? It's like, oh, wow, my boss is never going to forgive me for not producing value for the last 2 months and then still not having anything to show for it, but this broken pipeline that I swore was going to revolutionize the world. But I tell people, hey, just take 15 minutes out of your lunch and go see if you can set up a CI system. Don't ask anyone. Don't tell anyone. It doesn't cost anything. Just 15 minutes a day. And then a couple of weeks from now, you're going to be like, wow, our CI system is running. I already have this cool package. I added unit testing, and you didn't have to ask permission. There's no risk of you not – if you never get it to work, no one even knows, right? It's not like you promised this amazing experience and then didn't deliver. It's like, I didn't promise you anything, but look at this amazing experience that I delivered anyway. Like, you're going to be a hero in your organization. And that's the route that I would take.
I kind of think that nice thing about deploying into the cloud too is like there's no difference deploying into the cloud whether it's nominally production or it's a test version, right? It's just a URL difference, really.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the things that the cloud makes really powerful is the fact that having dev, QA, and prod environments on-prem is very expensive. Having them in the cloud is really cheap. And they should look exactly the same. And you can do that using a technique called infrastructure as code, where you actually codify the definition of your target environment. And all you're going to do is take that exact same environment and deploy it 3 times. And you know it's going to look exactly the same. Now, I say exactly the same. Whenever we're talking about infrastructure as code, we allow 2 things to change. It's the scale and the configuration. But other than that, it's the same, right? You might have one VM. Let's just do VMs because everyone understands VMs. You might have one VM in dev that has the SQL Server on it, the middle tiers on it, and the front end on it. But when you get to QA, those are going to be 3 separate boxes. But the way I deployed it is still using the exact same files, right? I still said, hey, it's a configuration file. I want 3 of these instead. And great, but it's still a VM. I know the sizes. And then when you get into production, it's 5 VMs or whatever, right? Because you're going to scale some more stuff. But so the only thing that changed from dev to production was the scale. But the files that I use are exactly the same. I'm just going to pass in different parameters to have it behave slightly differently. But I know how to stamp out these things as rapidly as I need to. Another thing that's really cool about the cloud when you're dealing with multiple environments is I can delete dev when I'm done with it, and I can delete QA when I'm done with it, and only have production running. Where on-prem, I guess you could unplug the machines or turn them off when you didn't use them, right? But then you'd have to remember to go run in and plug them in or turn them back on when it's time for you to actually do development again and testing again. It's just a pain in the butt. But that the cloud gives you this flexibility to have these environments that are only there when you need them and don't cost you a dime when you don't. And then you've been able to deploy them very repeatedly, which is really nice as well.
Yeah. I also like to experiment with different architectures too, because you just turn them on, turn them back off again.
Yep, and I also do that with scaling as well, right? When I want to figure out, so what size VM do I need? What size app service plan do I need? Well, just run a test against those different sizes, see if the numbers match, and then buy the one that fits your needs perfectly without having to guess on, or what's even worse is over provision, right? Because what most of us do is we provision for Black Friday. Which happens once a year. Exactly. So now we have all this capacity just sitting around costing us all this money for one day of the year, where versus in the cloud, you're only paying for that for one day of the year, right? You scale out or scale up your infrastructure for Black Friday and probably leave it around until Cyber Monday's over, right? And then next thing, that Tuesday, everything goes back down to its original small size and runs your application for the next 360 days, and then it'll scale itself back out. And a human being doesn't even have to be involved. You can set rules that say, when you start to feel this traffic pickup, just go ahead and scale yourself out for me. And when you see the CPU or the memory or whatever metric we're measuring that determines if we have too much traffic go down, simply scale yourself back down. So this is automated scale up, scale out, which is fantastic.
Now, we have a couple questions coming in from the chat room. Before I get to them,
Sure.
The one thing that you've been kind of tiptoeing around, I want to make sure that folks kind of hear this is, right, as you're scaling and as you're learning and figuring out your pipelines, I also feel like DevOps kind of puts features in front of you. Here's a step. Here's something that you might not have thought about. Oh, unit testing. Here, you can do unit testing steps. Oh, you can do other things here. And right when I see them in the list of available tasks, it's like, I didn't think about that. How do I add that in? And just like you're saying, I can experiment and add those steps in to improve reliability, and resiliency of my application.
And security, right? So one of the things I search on most often in our marketplace. So we have a GitHub marketplace, and in the GitHub marketplace, you can actually see all the different things that we have. Matter of fact, I'll show you our marketplace real quick. So if you switch over to my screen, I can show you what our marketplace looks like. So this is the extensions.
Sure, there we go.
Yeah, these are the extensions for Azure DevOps. You have featured ones and you have most popular ones. And there's different sections inside of here that, again, opens up your world to holy mackerel. There's a lot more that I can do with these tasks and maybe I thought about doing originally. And obviously security is a really big one as well. But if I just come up here and just click the search button, it'll give me an idea of how many extensions there are. So there's 1,652 different extensions that are available to add value to your pipelines, which is really, really cool.
Awesome stuff. So
It's got to be a little overwhelming just to sort through all of that. Like, what do I need in my pipeline exactly?
That's a good point. So security is obviously one that a lot of people are interested in. So if you search for security, you're going to see things in here like Black Duck and White Source and pen testing, all types of cool analysis that you can do against your code to make sure that your code is solid from all types of different attacks that can actually happen, which is really nice. And some of these, like majority of these are free, and you can just use them right away and start adding value. We have package scanners, we have unit testing, we have UI and performance testing. It's just amazing. I'm not sure of much you can't do in your pipeline, because especially when you're looking at Azure DevOps in particular, it can run anything from a command line that you give it, like anything. And it can also run anything that has a REST API. So if you have a third-party tool that you don't see listed in this list of extensions, as long as it has a REST API or a command line interface, you can do that in your pipeline, which is fantastic. And you don't have to wait for us to write an extension or someone else to write an extension. The other thing I think is really cool about our marketplace is that many of the extensions that are written by Microsoft are in a GitHub repository. So you can go see how we've written all of ours and use those as templates to write your own as well.
Now, that actually feeds a little bit into this first question we have here from the chat room. This is Raventhorn. Raventhorn is asking, what are the big differences between starting your repository in GitHub versus an Azure DevOps repo? What am I gaining or losing from each when it comes to setting up deployment with Azure DevOps?
What are you gaining or losing? Nothing. The reason why is because our pipeline tool, Azure Pipelines, let me see if I can go back here real quick. We can just take a quick poke around. It actually will let you pull from anywhere that you want. So if you have your code in GitHub, it'll take it from GitHub. If you have your code in Subversion, you can grab it from Subversion as well. So if I come here and create a new pipeline, I can pull from all these places. So if your code happens to be in Azure repos, Bitbucket, GitHub, GitHub Enterprise, this would be for some we haven't had a specific wrapper for, or Subversion. Your experience inside of Azure DevOps will be exactly the same. So it doesn't matter where your code is. I have code that's in both of these repositories. So I have open source projects. As a matter of fact, I was reviewing some pull requests before we hopped on the call that are all stored in GitHub, still built with Azure DevOps. I have private code that's inside of Azure repos that I never intend to open source that stays in Azure repos. But my build and my release are exactly the same. So that doesn't bother me at all. If your code is in GitHub, you also now have GitHub Actions available to you, which GitHub Actions only works on GitHub, which means if your code lives anywhere else, you cannot use Actions. And if your code is already in GitHub, look at Actions. Maybe it does everything that you need. If it doesn't, then you can have a nice grow-up story into Azure Pipelines, which is just, it's ridiculous. Like, it's the only way to describe it. It's ridiculous, right? What you can do there, the integrations with third-party systems, the approval process, the multiple environments, it's just, it's ridiculously good.
I've got this fear of YAML that's creeping in, Donovan. There's right. I'm a tabs instead of spaces person, but YAML doesn't work that way.
Yeah, so I'm going to show you something here real quick. So in Azure Pipelines, I guess that's an advantage of Azure Pipelines. This is a graphical user interface I'm showing you right here, and this gives me access to literally drag and drop what I want to build my pipeline. Right? I want to add this one, and then I want to be able to add this one, and visually I can do whatever I want to. So if you're completely afraid of YAML, and trust me, I was for a while as well, then Azure DevOps gives you a graphical way to build your pipeline. What's cool is that you can kind of baby step into this too, because you can actually, when you're done modifying it, you can click this button that says view the YAML, and it'll show you the YAML that was written, and you can kind of copy and paste that into your master YAML file, and that's normally what I do. I'll build it visually because I just like this better, and it also demos much better. And then I'll just take the YAML parts that I need out of it, and then put those inside of a YAML file. Let me give you a quick reason why you need to kind of get over your fear of YAML, because
talk me off the ledge, Donovan. Come on now.
I am. I'm gonna help you out.
Okay.
I didn't see the point of YAML either until I was actually presented a problem where I realized, holy crap, now I understand why YAML is so important. Yes, no one likes writing YAML. It's I can't stand writing it either. But let's talk about the power that it gives you. On the League, which is the team of DevOps engineers that I kind of I shouldn't call them engineers, they're just DevOps specialists that I built. It's a team of people called the League. We have a website, and that website is built using Azure DevOps. And we use a pull request. So every change has to go through a pull request before it can be merged into master and then deployed to our production site. Well, as part of the pull request, you also have to run a build. And that build runs all of our unit tests. If any of the unit tests fail, then you cannot be merged into master and you cannot go into production. Well, I changed the structure of our project so vastly in one of my changes that the existing build definition would not build my code. I had to change the build definition for my pull request to pass, which meant anyone else who was trying to submit a pull request at the same time, one of us was going to have to fail because I had to go into the visual editor and change the actual build definition. And that's going to be very painful for everyone involved, right? Because I'm going to break everyone else, or I'm never going to get my changes in. And then that's when it hit me. Man, if my build definition were a file in my repository, when I created my branch, I would have also gotten a version of the build definition and been able to change it to be able to build my code. And then everyone else who had a pull request going in before me would have had the old version of the build def that they needed to build their code, which would have mean no one would have been impeded in getting their actual pull request accepted if the build definition were YAML in the repository. Does that make sense?
Now, right. Okay. Yeah, I'm on board.
So that's when it hit me like, oh crap, now I know why I need YAML. Still don't like it. Don't get me wrong. I don't like editing YAML. And we've made that process a little bit better as well. So we kind of merged this experience with our YAML editor where you can actually put your cursor in there. See if I can modify one here real quickly for you and give you an idea of what it looks like if you already have a YAML file. Because I believe these are kind of, let me find you a different example here. I'll find you another example and I'll show you where what we're trying to do here is merge the experiences a little bit, right? So it's not as rich as this UI experience, but I think we have one where you're going to be able to get a little bit better. Let's see if this is the one I want. Let's see if I can edit this. Oh no, this is a visual one too. See, I'm slow to move to the YAML ones too. I'll find one before we get off, but I have a YAML based file, and I'll show you how we can edit it visually, which is kind of cool.
Very
YAML
cool.
by example.
Yeah, exactly. But go ahead, ask me another question while I look around.
Sure. Are there any plans to release the Azure Storage Emulator for platforms other than Windows?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually don't know that. Yeah, because the storage emulator is going to be necessary for you to do things like functions locally as well, and just programming against that. That's a question we're going to have to take offline. I'll have to find someone who will be able to answer that one for you, but unfortunately, I can't answer that one.
Is that like a political conversation or a large, broader engineering conversation? Like, what's hard there?
I would have to actually go and talk to the team. I have no idea if there's plans there or not, so I haven't been in any discussions that would let me know if that is an issue or there's concerns or anything. I haven't even been in those discussions, so I'd have to go find someone who can even say, is this on your roadmap? And if so, what are the plans there?
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I'm looking at the Azure migration tool. This does seem like something you'd want to poke around with on an existing app, just to say, like, give me some warnings. What should I be worried about if I want to migrate?
Yeah. Yep. And if your what's really nice about that too is it'll give you all green check marks saying, hey, based on what features you're using inside of IIS, all that stuff transfers as is over to app service. You don't have to change a thing, right? Literally just give us your files, your output, and we'll go and we'll move them for you, which is really nice too.
There's only a handful of things you can do in IIS that Azure websites is going to complain at. Writing directly to disk, I think, is always a good one.
And also, depending on how you're doing your session state, right? Because if you're doing in process or SQL, it used to be tricky. You can now use SQL Server or Azure SQL as your SQL store, as your session store, which you couldn't do when it first came out.
Yeah, it's just not good of an idea. Like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. It's a great way to spend money, though, if you want.
Well, some of us are thinking, oh, I'm already paying for Azure. I'm already paying for SQL Server, right? Because that's where my data is. Storing my session state data in there now gives me the ability to scale out. Yes. Because you cannot scale out with in process, right? So if your sessions data is in process, you can't duplicate it because you don't know if the next request for that same user is going to be on the same instance that has their data in cache. But if you move it into SQL Server, or what we call a session state server, then you can actually do that. There is no session state server inside of Azure, so what you have to do is move over to Redis cache. Right. So when I did that, I was like, oh crap, now I got to learn what Redis is and how to spin one of those up and all that kind of stuff. So you got to think about that. But now that you can use SQL, if you were using SQL as your data store for your session state data on-prem, you can literally move that app without changing it to the cloud, which is really nice too.
But I think you should change that very quickly. It's kind of abusive to store session state in a SQL server. Like, that is not what SQL's for.
It's not. Agreed. Redis cache is an option. But let's talk about financial light, though. If I'm already paying for a SQL server, and it also depends on the volume, I would think, of your site, right? If you're
every new page request is doing a state request. Like, those are a lot of transactions, and they're dumb transactions. It's just a blob of data.
Yeah, key value store.
Yeah, well, so something like Redis would work for that, right? And I believe that someone had written an extension to be able to do session state inside of SQL storage in Azure, but I didn't get that one to work, or I just didn't do enough research because obviously I was investigating a lot of how can I reduce my costs. Redis is a great service. Redis is not cheap.
Right.
So you also got to look at the cost there as well, right?
Well, cost per transaction versus cost of the host, maintaining the host. Like, there's some subtleties there too. Lots of rapid fire, blobby transactional requests. Some services are cheap for that.
Sure.
They cost a little more to stand up. But transactional costs on SQL is not trivial. Like, that adds up, and like I said, they're dumb transactions. Like, and they're not providing a lot of value other than just give me a blob, now give it back to me, now give me a blob, now give it back to me.
So, exactly.
You're actually feeding into the next question I wanted to bring up here from Boom Boom. And in the chat room, Boom Boom asks, is there a manual on how to handle the build artifacts for a particular build? Let's say I want to make a release pipeline where a build pipeline produces an app. I want to publish that app out to Azure, and I have a command line application I'd like to push over to blob storage so folks can download. Is there any kind of documentation or manual we have to help folks structure a release pipeline?
All right, so I'll show you a couple ways you can do that. So if you switch back to my screen right now, first place I would go to is just type in docs.com. If you type in docs.com, you end up here, right? So this is all Docs Microsoft, no matter what it is that you're trying to do, no matter what product you want. If it's written by Microsoft, that
nice name. Holy man.
Say what?
Docs.com.
I know, I love it. And no one knows that works. I was filming something the other day, and it was like this 1 minute little video, and I was like, yeah, just go to docs.com. And then they didn't want to, I could tell they wanted to interrupt me, but they didn't. And then after the video cut, it's like, Donovan, you kept saying docs.com. It's docs.microsoft.com. I'm like, no, it's not. And the guy grabs his phone, types docs.com. I'm like, holy crap. I'm like, yeah, that's why I said it just like that. It's freaking awesome.
Wow.
So if you just go to Azure DevOps down in the lower left-hand corner here, this is going to bring you over to our pipelines. Everything you want to know about pipelines is right here. Like, it'll tell you the schema of our YAML. It'll help you create your first one. It'll talk about build artifacts, how you can consume those build artifacts in your releases after they've been stored. And then what you would simply do is if you want to copy a file that you've stored as a build artifact in your release, you download the artifacts, and they'll all have names that you can use. And you would simply there's a task for file copy, and you could copy it to blob storage. And you would simply say, the file I just downloaded as an artifact, its name is something.blah, and I want you to copy that to this storage account, and it will, and that'll be the end of it. So it's literally publish it as an artifact from your build, consume it as an artifact in your release, use the copy command to copy it to blob storage.
I really appreciate Boom Boom's question, because we all too often we're simply talking about building a website, but you're actually making software that other people are going to have to install or have to go pick up somewhere. Like, that's a build pipeline too, and
it is. And the thing about now that if that executable is something that you're going to want people to download and install, I might say, hey, why don't you start packaging it as like a NuGet or some other type of package? Exactly. That way you can then store that inside of either we have Azure Artifacts, which is right here. So Azure Artifacts allows you to do NuGet, MVN, Maven files, all, like we have a universal package store and everything. So you could take those artifacts, like you said, MSIs, executables, NuGet packages, Maven packages, and just store them so that people can actually just go download them like they would from NuGet.org or from NPM and things like that. So you can also do click once as well. So if you wanted to just copy that executable to either a storage account like you were describing to an app service, some place where people could go and just simply use click once to deploy it, you could deploy it that way as well. Everything is on the table when you're using Azure DevOps.
We talk about the putting to DVD pipeline. Do we need to go there?
No, we don't need to go there.
No.
In the chat room.
I found a repository. I mean, a build. I can give you a demonstration. So this is actually the project I was working on today.
Before you get too much further, there was a comment in the chat room about that docs.com domain name. Yeah. Look at this. Raventhorn says, yeah, pretty sneaky, Microsoft. that we have docs.com. That's right.
All of docs.
All of the docs come to Microsoft.com. All right, there you go.
I love it. So this I finally found. I don't know why I didn't come here first. The pull requests that I was working on earlier go through this exact pipeline. And you'll notice there's some cool stuff here. You'll notice it says Mac OS, Linux, and I have another one just for Windows. I actually have one build that builds on all three platforms because this is a PowerShell module, and PowerShell now runs on Mac, Windows, and Linux. And so what I need to do is I need to be able to compile and run my unit test on Mac, Windows, and Linux, because I have had unit tests pass on Windows because it doesn't care about case, and fail on Linux and Windows, Linux and Mac because I do care about case. And that's a really big problem if you don't catch it early, because you now have packages that seem to work perfectly on Windows that people on Mac and Linux cannot run anymore because of a casing issue. So now what I do is I build it on Mac, Windows, and Linux, and here is an example of a YAML file. Now you'll notice on the right-hand side is this task library, very similar to the one I was showing you in the graphical user interface before. This is actually the exact same task. So what you can do is you can find the area of your pipeline that you want to add something to, and then you can click on it, fill in the blanks, and when you click on add, it'll write the appropriate YAML for you in this section.
Nice.
Yeah, and if you want to edit one of them, you can just simply click on settings, and then it will reload the graphical editor on the right-hand side with all the settings from your YAML, allow you to change them, and then when you click add, it'll update that section for you. So we're trying to make YAML less scary by simply not letting you have to hand tweak it, but also giving you the power to come in here and hand tweak it, right, for whatever reason you might need to. So it's as close as we can get to the best of both worlds, is the ability to come back in here and just use a graphical user interface to write the snippet of YAML that you need.
Nice.
In the chat room, Fuel Snable actually, to chime on along with that, says, I've read the C# spec, the F# spec, and is used to eBNF, but they struggle to understand the YAML spec. But having an editor like that definitely helps in this case.
For sure. Yeah, trust me, knowing what parameters you're allowed to set and not set. That's why I used to do it the old way, which is where I would go into the graphical editor, I would build my pipeline, and you can click on a single task and say, show me the YAML just for this task, which is essentially what I just showed you. We brought the way that I used to edit my YAML, and we brought it into the YAML editor experience for you, to where you can just simply click on the parts. The graphical user interface will guide you through the required fields, the options that you have for drop downs, so you don't fat finger something, and then go ahead and write that YAML over there. So I try my best to never actually type YAML. When I'm doing them, I try my best to use the editor for everything that I can.
And Richard, I think you're seeing .NET Superhero was looking at Donovan after your docs.com. And of course, for the heck of it, they tried docs.com. I don't, .NET Superhero, I don't think that's the same thing.
DOCKS.
Not quite. Good try.
Not the same. Yeah. You know.
Yeah, docs, DOCS.com. We'll take you to our docs.
Yes.
Very nice. Thank you. Yes. So, my gosh. Okay, so, I mean, this is one thing about getting the application built and deployed, but there's a lot more to actually modernizing an application than just getting it built, getting it deployed, whether it's, and I like that we touched on console applications, desktop applications, of course, mobile applications, PowerShell, but there's other architecture things that we should start to consider. You've been mentioning SQL Server as a service, but there's other things out there too we should consider.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that's really powerful too are things like cognitive services. Like, this is where you're going to be able to bring literally artificial intelligence to your apps without knowing anything about machine learning. what we've done is we've taken very popular scenarios, like, for example, language and speech and vision, and we've packaged them into already fabulous learning modules. So if you want to detect people's faces, we actually already have a module or cognitive service that you can just plug into your app and then upload a picture, and we'll tell you if there's people in it or not. Right. There's even one that'll tell you if there's celebrities in it or not. Right. So if there's landmarks in it or not, which is really cool. So, and it's like 3 lines of code, right? It's not a lot of code to start adding this type of intelligence. We also have the bot framework as well, which will allow you to add these really cool bots to your application. So you can have a website that has a chat with us now, and very simple questions can be answered automatically in a very natural way for your users that may not even realize that they're not talking to a human being at that time. And again, once you're in the cloud, and actually some of this can be used even if you're not in the cloud, we package these cognitive services into Docker containers now to where you can actually use these smarts on the edge that aren't even connected to the internet anymore. So it's really, nice. Cognitive services is one thing when it comes to modernization. Thinking about scaling up and scaling out like you've never had before, because you can't write an app that doesn't think about being scaled and then scale it out and expect it to work, right? It has to understand that every request that comes back may not come back to the same instance that answered the last request. So just like when we're talking about session state, that's something you really need to think about. Like, how do I store that? How am I going to retrieve that if I might have 20 copies of myself running at a particular time? So sometimes modernization, you need to take that into account. That doesn't mean that you can't take an app that has not considered that and move it to the cloud. You would simply set the scaling rules to 1, right? Don't leave this freaking instance, right? Because I have not taken advantage or designed it such that I can move across. When I do, I'll start changing these numbers and we'll start taking advantage of the cloud.
There are big singularity instances if you want to pay for it. Right?
If you want, but again, that's one of those scenarios where I'm thinking, let's start taking advantage of the cloud, right? You're here for what it provides for you, and what it provides for you is that you don't have to do that. But to your original point, right, because you said this earlier, Richard, like re-architecting, that would be a re-architecture discussion, right? You might have to think about your application in a different way. You might have to start teasing things apart. Monoliths are obviously painful and hard to move, and you have to start teasing them apart. And that's what I would tell people to do, is instead of trying to completely re-architect for the cloud, this is something you've never done before, potentially, right? Because you've been working on a monolith your entire career, and now you think you're just going to pull it apart and then push it all up to the cloud and it all work? Probably not. So what we did, even on the Azure DevOps team, is we took TFS, which was a monolith that we used to ship to you and you would install in your own hardware, and we moved it as a monolith to the cloud and said, okay, now that it's there, let's start teasing it apart. What was interesting is, before we did that, we had an architecture set up for what we thought TFS would look like once we modernize it to the cloud. I can tell you right now, having teased it apart in production and learned from real world experiences, what we drew does not match what is running in production right now. Our assumptions were wrong. Exactly. You don't know what you don't know. And learning while you're doing it is so valuable. So what we did is we slowly teased it apart. I think the last count, it was 30 microservices are like in orbit around the monolith now, right? And I say that because the monolith keeps getting smaller, which is great, because no new functionality is added to the monolith. Everything that is added new is a microservices around it. And then every chance we get, we go in and we re-architect the monolith to make it smaller and pull out more functionality. Gives you the flexibility of, when build becomes very popular, you don't then have to scale up the entire TFS, because I don't need more source control. I don't need more boards. I don't need more artifacts. I just need more build. And it's very expensive to have to spin up multiple instances or bigger scales of everything when all I really wanted was more build. So being able to tease that out into a microservice allows us to scale up build regardless of having to scale up anything else, which is really nice as well.
Now, in the chat room, Fuel Snable says, read an article the other day that said monoliths are the future. Let's scrap the microservices architecture.
Wait till tomorrow when you read the other article, right? We've heard that over and over again. There are actually advantages to monoliths. They're actually really easy to design, right? They're really easy to build, but they're really painful to extend because there are a monolith, right? And the code base starts to become so big that any change can have catastrophic impact without you even knowing about it. Now, we've all been there. We're in a monolith. We're looking at this code base. There's a function that's probably, 400 or 500 lines long. It's a pretty intimidating function, and it's called by everybody. And then your question is, I need to go change this. Do I actually change this one that has absolutely no code coverage when it comes to testing, or should I copy and paste this 500 line function and rename it Donovan's function and call that one, because I'm too afraid to change the other one, right? So monoliths have this weird, they just expand, right? They just keep getting bigger because people are too afraid to change what might break something else. Or the other thing that I've seen when I used to work on monoliths is I would play ping pong with myself. And this is a scenario where you don't have the proper unit test in place. So what would happen is I would fix a bug, and then I would push it into production, no testing, everything was great. A couple weeks later, my boss would come running in my office. There's a bug I have to go fix. I'd fix that bug. I push it into production. Everything seems fine. But then the next day, he comes back in my office with a bug, and it feels like deja vu. I'm like, man, I feel like I fixed this bug already. Like, why does this feel so familiar? Then I go into the code, I'm like, damn it, I know I changed this. So I change it back, and I push it into production. And the next thing you know, the other thing is broken again. And if they happen too far apart, you don't ever realize those two changes are related to each other, right? But if I actually stop what I'm doing, write a unit test. Now, this is good if you're doing a monolith or if you're doing microservices. I'm a big fan of testing. What I do now is as soon as someone reports a bug to me, I stop and I write a unit test that exploits that bug and shows me that, yep, it is broken. Then what I do is when I fix that bug, run my unit test, and it passes, and then I push everything into production. When that second bug comes back in, first thing I do is I stop and I write a unit test for that second bug. And then I write the code to fix it. And if they're related, my second test will pass, but my first test will fail, right? Letting me, Donovan, these two things, yeah, they're related to each other. And you now have to fix this in such a way that it fixes both of these tests or re-architect it. But if you don't write the test, and I find this very true for some reason in monoliths, I find a lot less code written in monoliths than I do in microservices, because microservices being a new technique, test-driven development not being just a niche anymore, people starting to believe in it. I'm starting to see people, when they have a smaller code base, more likely to write tests for it, which microservices lend themselves to. And it also makes troubleshooting easier, makes deployment easier. Trust me, we all ebb and flow, but microservices aren't new, right? The separation of concerns is not new. They've been talking about this since the 70s, right? It's always been the right way to write software. So anyone who's practicing wanting you to do monoliths is, I don't know, maybe they're trying to sell you VM storage. I don't know. That just sounds like a bad decision, a bad idea for me.
So Isaac, our friend Isaac Levin here in the chat actually points out additionally here that when we get past that monolith, one of the most overlooked areas of modernizing apps is monitoring. What should folks start thinking about monitoring, right? The app is outside of my data center. It's now not just one thing. What should we start considering for monitoring when we're modernizing apps?
That's a really good question. I always love using the Azure DevOps team as an example. They collect about 7 terabytes of data a day on all the things that run Azure.
Same for those disks.
That's a lot. And
terabytes
a day. Like, so
Western Digital loves them, don't they?
Yes. And matter of fact, it was so much data to comb through. We wrote a in-house tool for combing through that data, but that is now a service inside of Azure, right? It was like, because we have lots of customers who have the exact same pain points that we do. Combing through large sums of data is difficult. So what we did is we wrote a service, which is now, I think it's called App Insights Analytics, Data Analytics. That used to be an internal only tool that the Azure DevOps team wrote for their own use, which we now publish as a cloud. But to your question, we don't collect 7 terabytes of data simply because we're randomly monitoring everything that we can. Each one of those, every bit of that data is helping us pinpoint the answer to a question that we have. So when people say, where should our telemetry be? It should be where it's going to help you answer questions. If you simply collect telemetry for telemetry's sake, it's just noise at that point. So make sure it's real thought out, and it should be something that you're planning when you're designing the feature. Because what we want to do is deliver value. What metrics do I need sent from this particular feature to let me know if we're actually delivering value? If it's a multi-step feature, then I want to know, did they start at the beginning and end at the end? Or did they fall out in the middle? Are they getting confused somewhere? So the telemetry that I collect on something that looks like a transaction is going to be different than something that's an atomic, right? Where I just want it to count. I don't need to know the funnel and where they went through the funnel. So what telemetry that you collect depends on what question you're trying to answer. And are you looking for reliability? Are you looking for stability? In that case, you might be looking at lower level infrastructure metrics like CPU utilization, disk space utilization, memory utilization, versus are we delivering value, where I'm looking at custom telemetry that I'm putting inside the actual code that I'm actually writing. So again, when people ask me, where should we put telemetry? I'm like, what question are we trying to answer? And I don't tell you to sprinkle telemetry all over your app. Like, what are we trying to figure out? Are you having bottlenecks that you're trying to determine? Are you having features that you're pushing out you don't think are delivering value? What is the problem? And then I can give some idea of where you should be putting telemetry. But to deliver value, you have to measure your application while it's running in production. Otherwise, you have no idea if you actually delivered value or not. And the reason that I love this being an agilist is that we live and die by the things called a product backlog. It's a laundry list of any and everything that you want your application to do. And at the top of that list should be the most valuable thing. And historically, we just took our product owner's word for it that was the most valuable thing. Right. But with telemetry, you can actually put telemetry in the feature when you ship it and then go back and say, interesting, you said that was the most important thing, but 90% of our customers do not use that thing that you just told us was most important. Now, are we completely off and we need to go and reprioritize our product backlog? Or is it not intuitive? Do we not do the right marketing push? Like, why is this thing not getting the traffic that you promised us it would because it was the most important? And it now allows you to have a much more intelligent conversation over the priority of the items in your product backlog versus you just doing what the product owner says and assuming that they're right.
Well, so, the product owner is also getting heat from certain customers. Like, that 10% utilization is the biggest customer and he's got my phone number.
Right, and maybe that's justification for that, but now we're going to have an intelligent conversation. Now, one person, I wanted to go back. I saw one of the chat said, we have microservices architecture. Trust me, catastrophic changes are absolutely possible. No argument there.
Yep, let me bring that up. That's Fuel Snable. There's his message right there.
Absolutely. So one of the things I want to talk about there is that there is no promise that microservices architecture was going to stop you from having errors and bugs, right? That is just basically separation of concern, small modules that you can deploy much faster than you did before, that can be developed and deployed in isolation, and can be scaled independently.
Yeah,
now,
that last part's important. Oh, my goodness.
It is. And I think another thing that you need to do when you're having these catastrophic failures is do root cause analysis. Figure out what actually caused the failure. Was it a versioning issue with your microservices architecture? Let's make sure that we are versioning our microservices correctly, which is something that we do in Azure DevOps really well. I have a show called Azure DevOps Interviews where I sit down with the head architect for all of the microservices for Azure DevOps. We talk about how they version them and how we can now deploy them in any order that we want because they have backwards compatibility with any version that is still actively being used, so that it doesn't matter when I deploy it because I can deploy it as fast as I want. And the two services will negotiate at runtime, are you at the version that I want? And if so, if not, I'll back up to the version that I know you can use to get my goal accomplished. But we're never going to crash simply because you happen to update yourself and things like that. And once we deliver a contract, that microservices can never change that version. Like, not even the signature, its behavior, nothing can change. If you're going to change the behavior or the signature, you have to produce a new version of that microservice, guaranteeing that the old version will always work as it was supposed to work. You couple that with microservices, and these catastrophic behaviors go down drastically. Because even if you have one, recovering from it with microservices is literally the click of a button, which is fantastic as well.
It does mean there's discipline in the developers to make sure that they're identifying the versions they need for the features they need. Like, people can still screw this up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, without question. And there's more moving parts, right? So I think it takes more discipline, right, to think about, because you have to think so far ahead of all the different permeations. When you get 30 microservices rushing into production at any time you want, that's architecture, right? That's not a deployment question. That is an architecture question. How are we going to architect our app to be able to be deployed at the speed in which we want to be able to deploy it and mitigate these catastrophic things that could happen should something break, right? And that's also another reason why you should have very distinct environments, dev, QA, and prod. That catastrophic issue should not be found in prod.
Yeah.
It should have been found well before prod so that our customers are not negatively impacted by that. And if you're actually doing microservices correctly, the change should be insignificant. And the change should be easier to deploy or easier to detect because hopefully we deployed one microservice. All hell broke loose. I bet it's in that microservice. Like, let's go. What do you think, right?
But I think it also gets to this philosophical point of view on the architecture side that retiring old software is now rare, right? We get these larger systems where in some ways you can't even make a copy of production anymore because the bunch of code that you're dependent on, you don't own. You know, it's a group of companies. It's a bunch of interactions going on. And so, now you have this sort of background philosophy says, when do we get to turn off a service we deployed? Ever.
Yeah, it was funny. So I write several tools that use the Azure DevOps API. And you can configure mine to use whatever version of the API you want. But I was asking, I was like, so how do you know when you can actually retire an API version of Azure DevOps? I said, is 1.0 running? Is like on many of the services, yes. It says if we have any telemetry that shows us that someone requested that version of the API, we will not kill it. I'm like, so if I run a bot that every day just wakes up and makes pings a particular API I don't want you to delete, he said, we will never delete it. Like, wow. Yeah. So yeah.
Used, right?
Exactly. If it's used, we're not deleting it, which is unbelievable.
So you're kind of touching on a couple comments that we have here in the chat room. I want to make sure we reflect over here.
Sure.
Fuel Snable points out, and you said a bot, right, is connecting to some of these APIs, just to make sure that folks know we're not talking about just web apps. Right? These are back-end services that could be supporting not just web applications, but mobile applications, desktop applications, IoT services, right?
For sure. And that gets a little bit trickier when you're talking about like database versioning and things like that, which we've figured some of that stuff out as well. I think that's one of the things that no SQL databases have really helped us with, is that you can be a much more fluid in your schema and your changes can be less catastrophic. But you're absolutely right. And when we're thinking about things like feature flags as well, a feature flag isn't always just at the UI level. The feature flag is sometimes like literally inside of the database, switching on which stored procedure do I call based on the behavior of the version that you've actually asked me for, right? So you're absolutely right. This is not just the web app that the person is using. These feature flags, this versioning, all happens inside of your middle tier microservices, and it also happens sometimes in the stored procedures and in the databases themselves. We do it on the Azure DevOps side all the time.
Yeah. And to your point of, I want to know if somebody's actually touching this API, here's Legendary Moo comments that they're just trying to figure out what pages inside their application customers are using. Perfect example of telemetry.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you use something like Application Insights, you get most of that stuff for free, right? Like if you literally just enable Application Insights on your app, it'll start telling you exactly what pages they use, how long the pages were actually taken to actually load. And if you add a little piece of JavaScript, and I think you get all that I just mentioned without like any code changes at all. Just enable App Insights for your app, and it'll start collecting tons of telemetry for you. But if you add a piece of JavaScript to your actual page, it'll start telling you what browser they were using, where they were in the world. It's like unbelievable. So should I be supporting IE6? Well, we'll tell you exactly how many of your customers actually hit your website using IE6. And I remember I used App Service once. I run a website for racing cars, and I wrote it like 20 years ago. And there's 3 different ways to like view the calendar of events. One of them was looks like an actual calendar, and it was the original way that the app was written. And then I started creating some different list views that you could use. And the list views I find far more efficient. And the code for the calendar is actually pretty complicated to get all the events to show up in the right cells and move the ads to the right cells that don't have events in them. It's a pain in the butt. I'm like, man, I'm sick of maintaining this code. I bet no one even uses this anymore. But before deleting that feature, I went into App Insights and I added some telemetry. I said, every time someone views it by a calendar, every time someone views it by a year, and then every time someone views it by a month, let me know. And count the number of times they use it. And I let it run for a month. And I realized that the calendar is still the most used way of access to the website.
Not for you, but everybody else.
Exactly. Like I'm like, wow, if I had deleted that, I would have upset a lot of people. But that was the telemetry. So it goes back to, what telemetry do you put in? What question are you trying to answer? My question was, what is the most common way of using the app? Or more direct question, can I delete this feature? Right? It was what I really wanted to know. Can I delete this feature and get rid of all that code? And the answer was no, you cannot, because the majority of the people still view your calendar with this original view that they knew. They might not even know. Now, what I could do is I could run some experiments and say, put a little pointer. It's like, hey, did you know that you can actually view the calendar in different views, and try to drive the traffic to the parts of the app that I want to maintain? And if I can move enough data, and the telemetry will tell me if I have or haven't, then I can say, great, now that 90% of the people aren't using it, the surface area is much smaller. I'll put a banner letting you know that that's going away and that you now have to move over there, give you a couple months to get ready, and then I'm going to kill that feature. But the numbers were so skewed that I was like, nope, just leave the feature. Just make your customers happy is more important than making my life easier as a developer.
And about the telemetry, Raventhorn kind of parroted along with some of that Donovan's right. Adding telemetry for the sake of telemetry can actually cause its own performance implications and issues.
Absolutely. Like I said, in the end, you're going to lose. It's like a needle in the haystack. What you're looking for is going to be so hard to find because there's so much other telemetry that just simply isn't necessary for you, which can actually just slow you down. Not only slow down your app, but also it costs more because you got to store all that data.
Yeah.
The more data you collect, the more data you pay for.
Somebody's got to put that 7 terabytes somewhere.
Exactly. Exactly.
But it's certainly a useful thing to snap onto a monolith now running in the cloud and start figuring out what parts are we using, what parts are causing problems, what piece should I peel out first.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
It's having a performance problem, that's having modification problems, whatever that may be.
Yep, absolutely agree. Just know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Well,
in some ways, it's almost like method profiling, right? You could use Avid that way. Say, where's my activity in this chunk of code?
Yeah, find your hot path.
Well, and Boom Boom here says when they enabled application insights on their development environment, it came back a few hours later with, you've reached your daily cap for your app's telemetry data.
Yeah, that's for free. That's for free. So you can actually tweak a lot of that, right? So you can go into your app configuration and you can say what you want to collect and what you don't. If you're on a free plan, what I'd probably tell you to collect is, it depends on what question you're answering on, but you don't want to miss any exceptions, right? That's the most important thing you're going to get is us saying, hey, you just threw an unhandled exception on this particular page. Here's everything I know about it. But you're absolutely right. Depending on how much traffic your app is getting, the amount of telemetry you're going to produce is going to be great. And for free, we only let you collect so much. But you can obviously lift that by simply saying, don't cap my data, or this is how much data I'm willing to pay for. And then it'll stop eventually for collecting data. You must have a very popular site for it only to take a couple hours, because it usually takes some of my sites longer than an hour.
Yeah, Boom Boom. Good problem to have.
Congrats on your website.
Yeah. I don't know if that's good or not, right? There could be a lot of exceptions too.
Oh, that's a good point. It doesn't know what the telemetry is saying. If it's just visiting pages, that's great. If it's throwing exceptions, start at the top and hopefully wiggle those down. Be
careful.
That's another part of it. I've definitely dealt with sites where we have lots of exceptions being thrown all the time, and we're trying to figure out which one to prosecute first. Like they end up breaking up into classes. It's like this one happens a lot. This one happens very rarely.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you want to make sure people, when an app is throwing a lot of exceptions, I wonder if people are actually using exceptions correctly. They're supposed to be an exception. They're not a return code. They're not how you decide if something happened or didn't happen. This should only happen when, oh my God, this was not supposed to happen. This is an exception, not I want to return false, right? And so I'm going to throw an exception at you.
It's low enough quality that it was throwing a lot of exceptions. But the metric that the dev team took was how many phone calls are we getting?
Oh, wow.
And the users had now been conditioned that when this page fails this way, do this other thing, don't bother calling tech support, they're not going to help you anyway.
Interesting. Well, that's interesting because that starts to start talking about some SRE kind of debates there.
Hang on. Acronym police, SRE.
Site reliability engineer. When you talk about SRE, there's a thing called SLOs and SLIs, which is indicator. What's the service level indicator, service level objective? Now, the indicator is the number that you're measuring, but the objective might not be 100%. To reach the point, we don't need 100% because no one's calling us, right? Like we want our customers, they know how to behave, but if they called every single time one of those happened, you'd want to start inching up towards as many nines as you could get. So their objective was not get a phone call. Yeah. And they were meeting their SLO.
Not a good objective, actually.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's so crazy. And then the SLI was number of exceptions, which were high, but since they weren't getting phone calls, they didn't care, right?
Sure.
If you give yourself bad enough numbers, then you can always get the results you want. But it was useful when we started plugging in these lower end tools to start seeing what we were ignoring in the software.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I bet you didn't have a lot of unit tests in that code, did you?
Now you're just talking crazy guys. We're talking about people not even calling because of errors anymore. They've just gotten used to them, right? Much less than anything.
That is one of the biggest problems that I see in software development is the fact that people simply do not see the value in unit testing. And I just don't understand it. If I write code without unit test, I feel uncomfortable. I feel like I'm riding my motorcycle without a helmet if I ship code that doesn't have this.
Right. Oh, yeah.
But it took me years to get there because I was that developer who thought I can ship more code if I don't write unit test.
Yeah.
What I did not realize is that was only true for the first release.
Yeah.
The second release was impeded by all the bugs that I shipped into production the last release that stopped me from adding new features while I was fighting bugs. And then what I tell everybody who thinks that they're saving time by not writing unit tests is do me a favor. The very next time that you get a bug, start a stopwatch. Okay? And I want you to keep that stopwatch running as long as it takes you to troubleshoot that bug. as long as it takes you to fix that bug, and as long as it takes you to ship that bug into production, and as long as it takes you to repair your reputation from shipping that bug the first time. When that's done, stop that stopwatch and tell me, could you not have written a unit test in less time than what is reading on that stopwatch? And the answer is always 100% yes, right? So you do not ship more value by not writing unit tests, because the time you think you're saving is lost with every bug that ships into production.
Well, your value is not measured in the amount of code you write.
It's not. You shouldn't be. It's one of those things that goes back to telemetry. You got to be careful of what you measure, and you also have to be careful of what you're not going to measure. Lines of code is not something you should be measuring.
Measure that.
Right? Code coverage, you got to be careful how you measure that one. I'm actually a fan of code coverage, but striving to 100% is not the goal of coverage.
Pareto's law applies, right? Anything past 80%, you're just suffering so much to get that last 20 for much more diminished returns.
And also, what I want my teams to be doing is making sure that the number stays flat or moves up.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
That means any new code that was written has also been unit tested. So I don't care if your percent coverage is 1%. It better not go to 0.9%, or I'm going to have a talk with somebody. Right? As long as it stays at 1% or goes up, then we're good. Eventually, it'll keep getting higher, but I just don't want it going down. That's going to stop the bleeding. Let's stop the bleeding by taking whatever number we have and making sure it stays flat or goes up.
But you are mandating new code with tests then to keep that number at least level, as well as some budget put into adding tests to old code.
Right. It says percentage goes down when you delete code. That's also a good move.
Yeah.
Right? That's also a good move. If that code's no longer needed, or that code is just waste, and code that's not being called is just noise when I'm trying to read the method, when I'm trying to read through the code, right? So absolutely, however you get your percentage to go up, deleting code is a fantastic way to get your coverage to go up.
And the comment we saw there from Hugo, recovering users, right there, their trust in your application is massive.
It is. And what I've also noticed too, having run production websites myself and had to compete with some people, losing a customer is so much harder to regain than just keeping a customer. Right? Just keep the customers you have by making them happy and making sure they can trust you, because once they leave, getting them back is almost impossible. And that's hard enough on websites. It's even harder on mobile. Right? Because mobile, there's at least a dozen apps that want to do the exact same thing for you for free as the app you're using right now. And now I don't trust you for whatever reason, because you crashed my phone or you don't get it updated properly. And I'm going to go to one of your competitors, and I may never be back because there's 12 others I'm going to try before I come back to you. Right? So it's just, the trust that you get from your customers. They say, hey, fail fast. I'm more of the team succeed fast, and just keep succeeding over and over and over again by using the best practices you can, finding those errors early, designing quality into the product instead of trying to bolt quality on after the product's been shipped, which a lot of people do, right? So let's talk about designing quality into the product, using things like test-driven development, using great environments inside of your infrastructure that allows you to test in dev, test in QA, run full automated UI tests. Quality should not be optional. Quality has to be paramount in everyone's development.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Early on, talked about this sort of series of modernization steps, and it feels to me like the win when you get rid of those VMs, using more like the Azure websites and some of the other services in place and so forth, is bolting on things like Teams and the Power Apps, like bigger apps essentially that tie together.
Yeah, so at DEVintersection, in my keynote, you'll see me write a Power App, a Power Flow, or will be Power Automate, Power Flow, and a Power BI app in 2 minutes. It's ridiculous, and it all integrates with Teams, right? So I basically have Teams. We have this new initiative, and the initiatives we want to be able to welcome our customers to our service. So every time a customer gets added, we want a Teams notification to be sent, letting us know that there's been a new customer, so our teams can go and introduce themselves to them. So the database table exists, but my devs don't have time to go write this, right? So we created the table, but we don't have time. We're under the deadline. So I go into Power Apps, say, hey, there's a database table here that I'd like to be able to add records to using this new UI that says a new customer's happens. And I do that without writing a single line of code in about maybe 45 seconds. Mm-hmm. And then I go and I create a flow app that says every time there's a new record added to this table, please tell Microsoft Teams that there's a new person added. That takes about 30 seconds. And then I go into Power BI and say, show me a dashboard that I can build right now with no code. And then when I'm done, I use the app to add people, and then I go back into Teams and show you all the records being written into Teams. I don't write any code. I'm done in about 2 minutes. It's ridiculous. It's one of my favorite parts of the demo is like, watch this. I'm not going to write any code, and I'm going to add all this functionality to an app, and I don't have to be a developer to do it.
And yeah, we think about Teams as the sort of collaboration tool, places to move things, different ways to connect with people, find stuff, keep stuff organized as well. So it's interesting to me to think about a customer-facing app where it's feeding information into that flow so that, we're all more aware of how customers are using your products.
Man, we use Teams for all sorts of stuff inside of Microsoft. Like our Kanban board from Azure DevOps is embedded as a tab inside of Microsoft Teams. So when you're on your daily stand-up and you're in Teams already, you can just click a tab and there's your Kanban board, and people are dragging their task to update it, and we're all seeing it in real time, which is fantastic. It integrates with SharePoint. You can write flow apps to send whatever data you need to a channel to keep you alert. Whenever my team, the league, has this hashtag, LOECDA, every time you use that hashtag on Twitter, it actually sends a notification into Microsoft Teams that we see, and then we go and we can click on it, jump back to that tweet, and start interacting with our customers, right? So we use Teams for all sorts of cool stuff inside of Microsoft, not only integrations with internal apps or customer-facing app, but even apps we didn't even write, like Twitter, right? You can actually integrate Teams with everything and have a really nice. It's like where I go for everything now. My meetings are in there, my chats are in there, my channels are in there. Everything's in Teams for me.
So in the chat room, Legendary Moo asks, well, wait a sec. Can you embed your project wiki into Teams as well?
You can. There is a way that you can embed any arbitrary URL that you want. So when you just go to the extensions there's one in there, but there's actually one for Azure DevOps that allows you to have a much more integrated experience. So I know that I've done the Kanban board. I think I've done a wiki in one of my channels, but I can't think of it right now. But just go into your extensions and look, and if not, there is one that'll bring in an arbitrary URL for you.
And you can use that. Raventhorn chimes in with, what battery source does Donovan run on? My lord, I could use whatever that is today. Amen, Raventhorn. My goodness.
Yeah, I don't drink coffee, but I eat a lot of candy, right? So I'm usually buzzing around on sugar. And I'm getting a reputation because I had some friends of mine come from Europe, and everyone that saw me was handing me Haribo candy every time they saw me. So that's what gets me going. I love sugar. Yeah. But you get talking about tech, and especially Azure and Azure DevOps, I'm gonna get all amped up because this stuff is awesome, right? If it's literally like anything that you want to go build, what you need is in there to go build it. And being a developer has gotten so much easier because I don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over again, right? Like there's services that already do that. And I've run an IIS server. I have a big 42U rack in my garage that used to be behind me in this office that had these big Dell servers in it that used to run the website that's now running in Azure. And I don't miss those days. I don't miss my room being so hot. I don't miss the humming of the servers behind me. I don't miss any of that. And it's so much easier just to have it in app service now. I never have to reboot the server. I can scale it up or scale it out. It costs me next to nothing. It's just, so this stuff just gets me excited because I actually use the products that you're talking to me about, right? This stuff is just awesome.
I do like the idea, we talk about the culture of DevOps is this, we're always aware of the value we're providing to the organization.
Yep.
So to think about folks that are, down in the weeds, working on the code, maintaining the database and so forth, but then to still have a sense of how the company's functioning, that I'm not saying necessarily sales numbers, but some sense of, we sold some things today. We've solved some problems today. That heartbeat of a functioning business being visible throughout the organization.
One of the things that I noticed was really powerful, and it's really empowered us on the Microsoft side, is removing that ivory tower that was between the customer and the product group. Mm-hmm. There's nothing more motivating than seeing a customer that loves your product, right?
Oh my gosh.
It just makes you want to go. I remember I went to like I said, back to racing cars. I went to the Sports Car Club of America National Convention one year, many years ago. And when I got there, I felt like a celebrity, right? People were giving me hugs and taking pictures and thanking me for the software that I wrote. I had never been more energized to go back and write software than I did actually being connected to the people who actually used it. And the same is true when they're not happy with your software.
Sure.
Right? Able to have that feedback firsthand, to feel the pain and the frustration in their voice, it really motivates them. So you don't want there to be, I don't care what part of the application you work on, the database or the front end, you don't want there to be a wall between them interacting with the customers. Because when they do, it's going to motivate them in several different ways to make the product better because it's failing people that they care about, or just making it even better because they love what you're doing and they want to see more of it. But when you break down the walls between your customers and your engineers, you end up getting better software.
So an interesting question that kind of feeds along there. How do you tell your server admins it's okay to leave your hardware and learn Azure and they're not going to lose their job?
That's a really good question. I have a team that's led by Rick Kloss, the guy who wears the green hat, the IT pro guy, and I'm challenging him with that exact thing. And there is no loss of your job. Again, as a developer, I don't know how many layers there are to a network. I'm trying to learn because I've got to go past AZ900. I know there's more than one now, which is about as far as I've gotten, right? And I've never had to set up a load balancer, physical load balancer. I've never had to do any of that stuff because as a developer, that is not my job. My job is to go write code and get that code into production. There's a lot that goes on to getting production set up right on-prem and also in the cloud, right? There's a lot of things that it needs to be secure. It needs to be reliable. It needs to be scaled correctly so that we're not breaking the bank trying to run this app. The IT pros, the people who are using that infrastructure and understand that infrastructure, I still need you to know all that stuff. And I still need you to do your job. You're just going to be logging into the Azure portal instead of an admin console, right? And for a long time, you're going to probably be doing both of those things because there's ways that you can start to extend your on-prem infrastructure to the cloud and still have your on-prem infrastructure, right? So there's ways for you to extend your Active Directory. There are ways for you to extend your storage, right? So why are you sitting here maintaining storage servers on-prem when you can now use the power of the cloud to store that data or if nothing else, back up that data to a perfectly off-site, reliable storage that you can then use on-prem if you need to. So your job does not go away. Your job changes. Just like developers, our jobs don't go away, but designing for the cloud is changing the way that we do our job today as well. So do not believe that your job is going away. There are things in Azure as a developer I have no interest in, and I hope that my IT pros are going to be worried about security, right? And making sure that we're compliant and making sure that we're scaled correctly and make sure that the load balancer is configured correctly. That stuff as a developer I don't care about. That's stuff that I've hired you to go do, and I still need you to do your job now that we're in the cloud.
The line we use on Run As Radio, which is no IT shop ever got to the bottom of the to-do list.
No, ever.
Yeah.
I've never seen a product backlog go empty either, ever, right?
That's going to happen. There's more to do always. And one would argue that we stop working on crisis stuff and start working on more preventative stuff as the crises start to go down.
Sure. And like infrastructure as code is the best practice that I'm going to want my IT pros and my infrastructure people to be really heavily involved in as well. I'm not a fan of this no ops, no IT. Like, no, I need them, and I want them still doing their job. Hopefully they can do their job more efficiently and even manage larger infrastructure because a lot of that tedious stuff should be taken care of by Azure and allowing you to focus on what makes you very valuable to our company. But by no means am I here trying to say we don't need infrastructure or we don't need ops people. We need them as much as we ever did to understand the cloud.
Well, and to do more value, but there is an addiction. And the nice thing about the walking into a crisis each day, walking into the building on fire each day is you know what to do. Like you don't have to do a lot of thinking. You just go fight the fire.
Yeah, you and I talked about that before where some people were like they kind of lived on that needing to fight the fire thing.
Yeah. And are almost destructive when there's no fire to fight. Like, all I need's a match, man.
Yeah, don't burn anything down. Let's just go make other things better. Exactly. And if you have idle time, just think about how good your software is running.
Nice. Well, that's when you get into preventative work, but preventative work is thoughtful.
It is.
And one thing is it doesn't look like anything. This is the same problem we have with software, which is thinking doesn't involve a lot of bells and whistles or noise.
Yeah, and what's really nice about that is that thinking work, that creative work is hard for machines. It's what people are best at. And by taking that mundane churn that you have every day that a machine can happily do for you, allows you to go back and do the more creative things that we want you to do.
And provide way more value. Like the amount of value that's laying around inside of organizations' data is stunning. And it's never going to act on you. You have to act on it.
Yeah, very well said. I completely agree. So yeah, I am not here to take anyone's jobs. I am here to empower everybody in the organization. And like I said, I have 4 teams that I run at Microsoft, and one of them is. And what's really interesting too is that when we talk about infrastructure, it's not just the ops side of DevOps, right? There's infrastructure that runs your company that your customers never see, right? That infrastructure still can be lifted and shifted into Azure. These are file servers. These are SharePoint farms. These are SAP installations. These are your email servers. Like all that stuff still needs to run, right? Yeah. DevOps is about moving your production apps and your backend apps that are developed by you into production. But there's so much infrastructure that if you do not, let's say I went to Doormasters the other day, and they have infrastructure that runs that business regardless if they have a front-end website or not. They have inventory that they have to run, email that has to run. That's infrastructure. And all that infrastructure can also be moved to the cloud and does not eliminate that job because someone still has to monitor that stuff and put access control and secure everything. So I also wanted people to realize that infrastructure is not just infrastructure that's backing app dev. There's infrastructure that has absolutely nothing to do with app dev that also needs to be run as well.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me, man. There's some more questions. I still have a little time, so if there's questions you want me to answer.
Let me see what we get here. Raventhorn continues to say a lot of the mundane work that those server admins were working on, it's now done for you, and now you can worry about the bigger things and new things. But these folks, in their case, they don't want to learn, unlike the developers who want to learn all the time. Something to be said about that culture.
All right, so this to me has nothing to do with IT pro versus dev. This has to do with a growth mindset, right? If you literally want to keep doing the same job forever, then you're in the wrong industry to be able to do the same job forever. I am so sick of learning new JavaScript frameworks. I'm so sick. Like every day, by the time I finish this sentence, there will be 3 more JavaScript frameworks, right? It's just, and you got to stay on top of it. And if you're not enjoying that, if you're not excited about what you get to learn new, then it doesn't matter if you're a dev or an ops, right? You're slowing down your company's ability to innovate. And eventually you won't have a job, not because you didn't want to change, but because you're going to be outpaced and completely displaced by all your competition who's innovating still in this world, right? So that to me is a pure attitude problem that needs to be adjusted, has nothing to do with dev or ops.
I had this conversation recently with Don Jones on Run-As as well, where often people are learning routinely and forget that they are. Like that's the problem with routine, is it's not front of mind. And so, part of that is just sort of taking a step back and like, look at how often you're searching for things anyway. You are studying new things. You just don't consider it learning. It's just part of the job.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we're constantly reading stuff. I'm constantly working on MS Learn. I don't know if you've ever seen MS Learn before, but we've gamified learning. And I didn't realize how competitive my team was until I made it an OKR. I said everyone has to do 2 learning paths in February. And I'm like 4th or 5th on the list, right? And I'm not used to not winning, right? I'm like, what? Like, this is like, my team is crazy. But we're all learning, right? We're always constantly trying to be the best. I'm extremely competitive. So to be the best at what I do is important to me. And you can't not innovate. You can't not know what's coming and still try to be the best in the world at what you do. And that's what I'm not the best in the world, but I strive every day to be the best that I can be. And that requires learning and keeping up with technology and what's happening in this world. So I don't know. Sometimes I think my competitive drive is a curse, and other times I realize that's why I'm talking to you right now. Is know me because of that competitive edge that I had to get on the stage with Scott Guthrie and to try to own a space like DevOps for Microsoft, and that competitive drive. I think everyone kind of needs a little bit of that, right? Something that drives you to go learn and keep reading and keep getting better.
There's another question here about what's an OKR.
Oh, yeah, we forgot to explain that one. Objective and key results. So that is a way of tracking your progress, and it was originally invented at Intel. It gained a lot of success and notoriety at Google, and it has started to make its way into Microsoft as well. So what you do is you set an objective, which is a big, audacious goal, and then what you do is you have these key results, which are measurable, that you actually try to use that will, if you achieve these goals, you should then achieve that particular objective. So they're called OKRs. We just call them OKRs for short. And on my team, we just announced ours at the end of January. For February, we're going to do OKRs are normally done by quarter, but we're going to do them by month because we're new to them. And I'm a big fan of, if you're new to something, do it as often as you can to kind of get that muscle memory and learn. Whenever I teach a team agile, I do 1-week sprints, which are insanely quick, but you go through the muscle memory a lot before I grow you up into a 2, 3, or maybe a 4-week sprint. So I'm doing the same thing with my team when it comes to objective and key results, or OKRs. And we set them up for February. And the one for February, one of our OKRs objectives is to drive MS Learn traffic. Well, I don't want my team out there promoting MS Learn if they've never done one. So I was like, one on my team, you have to go do 2 learning paths, full learning paths this month. And I can show you here. I'll hop over to my screen here and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So let's go here real quick back to docs.com. All right, that's the quickest way to get there. And then you're going to see Start Learning over here in the right-hand corner off of Docs. And here I am. Dark Warrior is my username. And if you come over here, you can see my activity. So I did mine already. I was flying home from Seattle and I did some learning paths on the plane, which is kind of cool. But if you come over here to activity, what you're going to see is everything that I've been doing. And you get, sorry, let me go to achievements instead. So you can see you get badges, you get a score at the top, and then down here at the bottom, you're going to see some trophies start to show up. These trophies are for completing an entire learning path. A learning path is multiple modules that are curated together that will teach you something. And this create a service application is literally how I learned functions. I'd never written a function before running through this learning path, ran through the learning path, and have written tons of functions ever since. So these are not just surface level fluff documentation. These are like hands-on Azure, because every time you need to use Azure, you actually get a sandbox spun up for you. There's no credit card. It's absolutely free. We spin up a Azure subscription just long enough for you to run through this particular lab and get your hands dirty and actually touch and use the resources. And then when you're done, we tear everything down for you. But that's how I learned how to create function. That's also how I learned about some SRE. There's an SRE module in here that's fantastic. So if you really want to learn more about SRE, one of them is in here. And it should be one of the badges I earned recently. Yeah, right here. Introduction to Site Reliability Engineering. This is really fun. It's a really good module here too.
Very cool.
Yeah, Learn is awesome. But I'm getting my butt kicked by my team. I'm level 8, all right, which I just got recently. I have people that are level 11 and 10. They're just destroying me. So one of these weekends, I'm just going to just crank through as much Learn as I can. Try to catch up.
Powerful ways to learn, powerful ways to engage the team, too. It's interesting what makes people competitive. I just wonder if they're knocking out stuff they already know so they can move through it fast.
They might be, but that's more kudos to them to know that much stuff, to be able to crush still a level 11 learning path, right? For if you're an expert in that much and can just run through it. Because honestly, the DevOps one I did, that was really easy for me, right? So
wait a second.
Yeah, I blazed through that one on the plane. I was like, oh, this is good content. I saw my definition there a few times, which is kind of cool. Like, oh, this is good content. But yeah, that one was easy for me.
And how many of them are going through and finishing the ones that they themselves wrote?
Oh, that's a good question. Luckily for me, the SRE one was written by one of my people, but it's only a module, not a path, so he has to do more than that. That's a really good question. But David Blake Edelman has to actually do two entire learning paths, not just a module.
So cool. There's a question here. Can you show us how you found that again? Let me hide the cameras here real quick so you can see that right side. Go ahead.
Well, you simply go to docs.com and I just press enter, and then right here it says Start Learning. So when you click on Start Learning, you just go ahead and log in, and then you can start looking at all the different learning paths. As you can see, I'm 34% into Azure Fundamentals. This is 9 hours and 48 minutes worth of content. That's a huge content. Yeah. But when you're done with it, you should be able to pass AZ 900. Right, which like you can literally get certified doing this Learn content, which is really cool as well. So that's how you get there. Or I guess you could just go to docs.microsoft.com/learn. But I always just go to docs first and then jump over here.
Do you get epic weapons when you finish Learn levels? Asks Raventhorn. No, I don't think that's.
I will have to send that feedback. You get points, levels, badges, and trophies. That's what you get right now on the gamification. But it's surprising how gamifying something makes it more fun. So yeah, you can see level 8. These are the points, and this is the point I need to get to go to level 9. I have reputation points, which I have more than most of my peers, because this is when you go in and you answer questions and you interact with the community. You get reputation points. If you get answers that are actually accepted, which I haven't yet, you get those as well. And you can obviously follow your friends. So a lot of these people, if I go to following, a lot of these people are actually, all these people work for me. All right, so these are the people that I'm tracking on my team so far, which is kind of cool.
Raventhorn is suggesting that you need to receive the Sword of Everlasting Server Stability.
That could probably be a badge. Like honestly, we could probably get that to be a badge for you. we'll have to submit that as a badge title.
Yeah. Oh my goodness! If you could redeem these points for stickers, yes, that'd be neat.
That's not a bad idea either.
Real swag. Good.
Make some swag out of it. So let's do a little recap here, Donovan, because I think we went through a lot of stuff and a lot of energy. For folks that are talking, sort of embracing this idea of do we want to modernize, what we want to modernize, do you point them at Azure Migrate first, just to sort of take a look at the workloads they have and how challenging it's going to be?
You can do that. Another cool place that you can go is if you go to just Azure. I'm on my screen again. So if I go here to the Azure portal, one place that you can go is the Quick Start Center. So if you click on this thing here, it'll take you through guides. Like here's an Azure migration guide that'll actually walk you through the kind of questions, the considerations you're going to want to do, the options that you're going to have. Should I go just lift and shift to IaaS? Should I start thinking about modernizing to PaaS, or should we go ahead and just do full containers? There's a guide here. We also have tools in Azure that you can point out existing applications that'll help you migrate your databases. We also have a database migration project, which is kind of cool. And you can say, here is my MongoDB on-prem. I'd like to move it to this Cosmos DB using the MongoDB API, and we will literally wire up the migration for you and move it. And what's really cool is that you can actually move it and keep it in sync. Like, so what I want to do is I want to start seeing what it'll look like in production, but still running everything on-prem until we're ready to cut over. But I want all the data in Mongo to be synchronized with what's in Cosmos DB in production, so that when we cut it over, all my data is actually in Cosmos as well. So there's lots of different ways that we can migrate.
Yeah, that zero downtime effect. I mean, that's
absolutely.
I think it takes a while for folks that are used to running their own infrastructure, this idea that I can just stand stuff up in the cloud, mess with it for a while, tear it back down.
Yes, and what I also love about zero downtime is things like going back to my favorite service again, app service with deployment slots. They're amazing because normally what you would do when you're deploying an ASP.NET application is you would put up this catch-all web page that says, if I exist, all traffic should come to me, and that page is basically saying we'll be right back, right? And it captures all the traffic. That allows you to copy all of your files, your DLLs, and your assets to the web server. But the problem when you're doing that on your own infrastructure is you don't know if all those files are actually landed correctly. You don't even know if the files are right until you remove that web page, try to access the site. And if all hell breaks loose, you got to put that page back up and then try to troubleshoot in the dark. But with deployment slots, your production site keeps running. While in the slot, which looks exactly like production, you can copy the files as slow as you need to. You can then access that slot and see it in your web browser, make sure everything landed correctly, make sure all the new features are there, do whatever smoke test that you want, and then when you're ready, you click a button or run a script, and then it swaps the slots, and you have zero downtime deployment. And if something bad happen, you push the same button again, and it swaps them back to where production that was there before is still there again. So you literally get zero downtime deployment, but you're not blind in doing so. You can test the site before you actually swap them over.
I built infrastructure like that in the 90s and got paid a lot of money for it, thanks.
It's a button.
It's the tool. Yeah, it's just built.
A freaking button now, which is freaking awesome. So I use deployment slots on all my websites as well, because again, I want to give my customers that great experience of zero downtime.
Yeah, I just think the infrastructure sides of this, irrespective of what changes you make to the software as well, you just get hooked on. Let's just try it. You never to try things anymore. You're not endangering limited hardware resources.
Nope, I have dev and QA for most of my stuff because of that very reason.
When we get into the, I had sites big enough that they were willing to pay for enough testing infrastructure for us to maintain full integration tests in less than 15 minutes.
Okay.
And our belief was this: if the developer doesn't have enough time to start something else, the bug fix time is shorter. And 15 minutes is sort of the threshold of go down, get a coffee, come back, and the bug report is back, and they would then work on that. But most people will never spend that much money on testing equipment. But in the cloud, it's trivial to stand up a scaled out test infrastructure that can run this huge raft of tests and get it back to you in a few minutes. It costs you pennies because you just when you're done.
And because you're using infrastructure as code, it doesn't even take any human intervention to spin up the environment. You just run. It's like literally part of the automated pipeline. For example, I run some of my tests for VS Team. I actually run it against TFS, which is on-prem. So what my pipeline does, this is awesome. So my pipeline says, oh, it's time for me to go test TFS. Goes out into Azure and spins up the VM because the VM that it needs to test TFS isn't even running. It just spins up, wait for it to come up, and then goes and runs the test against TFS. And when all the tests pass, goes back and turns off the VM for me. Like, I don't do anything, right? It's freaking. I only pay for that VM for the couple of minutes I need it up to test TFS. And then when TFS is tested, I turn the VM back off, and my pipeline does all of that, which is amazing.
Well, and that's it's essentially a piece of legacy code you're running like that too, right? Like, I just the idea that we're not abandoning anything. That this piece makes no sense to modernize or really change. we'll push it up as a VM in Azure still and pay that cost. We only run it once in a while. And it's somewhere further down the to-do list is we should retire that thing.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree with you. But I love the fact that a pipeline can actually turn on and turn off resources on a per needed basis, and I don't have that VM running all the time because VS Team ebbs and flows on how many pull requests I get. So I don't have that VM running all the time. Sometimes I'll go weeks or months without needing to push a new version. But when I need a new version, it'll spin up. It'll run the test, it'll tear it back down, and I push out my release. It's awesome.
So do you do just a garden variety unit tests on every pull request? And for those higher end, that integration smoke test, do you do that nightly? Do you do that on some less frequent basis so you're not spinning up and spinning down the resources as quickly?
Got it. So what happens is every time you send a pull request, I run all the unit tests on all 3 platforms, right? So I won't even get a notification unless you can pass all my unit tests. Once I've reviewed your PR, I'll update the changelog, I'll update the version, and then I'll merge your PR into master. At that point, it gets built again, all the tests get run again, and then it goes through a deployment pipeline. At which that point, that's when I'll start spinning up the TFS machines, running the what I call integration test at that point, right? Because I don't need TFS to run unit. I don't need anything running to run my unit test. But once I start running full integration tests, which I do, then I spin up a 2018 TFS, 2017 TFS. Then I obviously have Azure DevOps running all the time. And then I run all my integration tests where I'm actually creating the projects, creating the builds, queuing the builds, seeing the results. And that's the only time I need those 2 servers. And once I get out of those environments, those servers turn off, and then I'll get a notification saying, Donovan, everything's green. Do you want to push this into PowerShell Gallery? And I simply say yes, and then it runs the last script that pushes it into the PowerShell Gallery that then makes that PowerShell module available for everyone.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, it is actually pretty cool. And I was going to see here if I had one of them, I could show you here really quick if you wanted to see one of them. Let's see. Release environments. Let me go to releases here because I'm about to push one of these here in just a moment or two. So if I come here to release 172, so this is what it looks like. If you show my screen again,
there we go. Let me turn off the cameras there so we can see that.
Yeah. So this is a release, right? So this is where I take it's been merged into master, and what I do because it's going into the PowerShell Gallery, which is essentially a NuGet feed. I learned the hard way that if I just push there and don't try installing it, sometimes again, it doesn't work on Mac, it doesn't work on Linux like I expected it to. So what I do is I build the package and I use Azure Artifacts, which is also a NuGet store, and I actually publish it as I will to the PowerShell Gallery in the last step to the actual internal NuGet store. And then these tests here, some of these are actually running on Mac. We'll then go and try to install that package as a user would onto the Mac and onto the Linux machines, and then run all my integration tests against it, making sure that the package can be installed and deployed correctly before I finally go off and install it into the PowerShell Gallery.
Nice.
So I even have a dev environment for my package manager, and if it's all green and this one didn't go through because this was just a PR as well, this will say, hey Donovan, I need you to notify it, and if I deploy this version that ran through this pipeline will then be deployed out into production.
Very cool.
Yeah, I like it. It's pretty good.
Yeah,
it works out.
Yeah, it's like a software geek's train set.
Pretty much. That's a really good way of putting it. Pretty much, right? And change gets on board and can actually run into production should I choose to. But I think as you can see here, I actually rejected this one. I think the reason why is because I had another deployment coming after it that was actually going to be 2 pull requests. I didn't version this version separately, so I had 2 requests that were going to come together and be the next version of the module. But I wanted to test that change in isolation. And then I added on the other change, tested it, and then I think I pushed them both right after that as one new version.
So are you committing the release note changes into source control with the pull request or after the pull request is merged?
Well, with the pull request. So what I do is when I'm reviewing the pull request, the last commit you'll normally see, and I think I just did one actually, is here I am going into production. Because I was like literally right before you and I got on the call here. Mm-hmm. I was messing with that stuff. So let me come here and go to GitHub real quick. Let's see what we can see. So if we go back, I think I just closed a pull request. So let's go to the last one I closed here, which is 225, I believe it was, 225. And the last commit on this should be me updating the changelog. Yeah, see, update version and changelog.
Okay.
Right. So then what I do is I merge that into master. The changelog is ready, the version's ready, and it pushes into production. And anyone who does a pull request will have everything in there. So I'm usually the last commit. Some people are starting to do this for me. I'm reviewing a pull request right now where the individual actually realized the pattern that I used for my change logs and put his name in there, put the the pull request he was merging in and what he'd added. So this is even getting easier because people are starting to see the patterns that I use when I'm doing my deployments and stuff.
That's awesome stuff, man.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you use the same tools you talk about, man. Like watching you actually utilize this for the work you're doing.
And I think that's why I get so amped up when I'm on stage. People's like, man, you can feel the passion. Like, yeah, because I'm talking about something that I actually do. Right? It's
making your work better.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's not as if I'm telling you something's cool that I don't believe is cool. I'm telling you something is cool because it's freaking cool. Like, let me show you what I did with it, right? Like, I use this stuff for real. Like, it's not me up here with the script from marketing or something like this. And even marketing knows not to do that anymore, right? Because I never say what they tell me to say. They're like, Donovan, these are the points I want you to hit. I'm like, okay, cool. And then I look at the points and I'm like, oh, yeah, I know how this makes sense. I just did these points, right? Let me just tell the story of where I hit all these points in a day. And that's what I'll do on stage. And they're like, you're the developer, just go tell that story for us. I'm like, sure. And then I go and I tell that story where I kiss all the babies, but it's not a made up story. It's like, yeah, I remember when I did this and I hit all these different areas. So
I can't wait to see this on stage. It's going to be great.
Yeah, I'm excited to do it again. I'm really excited to do it for you as well. It's a fun, cool demo. There will be 0 slides. I will just get up there, you'll introduce me, and I will go for 60 minutes, and it will be demo nonstop. It's crazy.
And I know Scott Guthrie's keynoting the night before your keynote. Yep. Are you going to be involved in that?
I sent him an email letting him know that I was going to be there, and he said absolutely, but I don't know what it looks like yet. So I don't know what I'm going to be doing for him. But I was like, hey, Scott, I'm going to be there if you need any support. He said absolutely. So I'm like, all right, so we'll wait and see what Scott wants me to do for him on Monday night. But this demo we're talking about here will be Tuesday morning.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I think I get there Sunday or Saturday, whenever. I forgot whenever you and I are going to dinner, but
you and I are doing dinner on Sunday, so I think you're actually coming in Saturday.
Yeah, I'll bring my wife with me too, so we'll all go do our Indian tradition that we said.
Yeah, I know where we're going.
Exactly, that is not an option.
Yeah, it's a part of the routine.
Exactly, awesome.
Well, friend, thank you so much for being part of this. It's really been
you.
Always, man, always. You know, all you have to do is just let me know when and where, and I'll be there for you, both of you guys.
Yeah, you bet.
Very cool. There's one final question. It's a good follow-up to your discussion about that keynote. Coding Stocks in the chat room asks, is the demo going to be available on demand afterwards?
There is one version of it floating around now. If you follow me on Twitter, I will find it for you and tweet it. The one you're going to get at DEVintersection is going to be slightly different, just a hair, because, again, I have to cut it down a little bit. I think I did a bot build that I don't think I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about cognitive services and where that would go. But we go over the bot so fast that you couldn't really do that, but I want to know where that is. And I think that'll get me within the 60 minutes if I cut just that little bit out of it. Because I don't want to be talking so fast no one can follow me. There's a balance between how much you pack in and how much people can absorb, and I'm trying to fit that balance there. But it was recorded at I was the second show of a all online meetup on Azure, right? And I ran through this demo there as well. But yeah, you're not going to want to miss this because I think every time I do it, we polish it a little bit better. So when I get to DEVintersection, it should be shining really bright.
I'm grateful you stay on schedule, man, because, you know, an enthusiastic keynoter, I'm never going to interrupt them, but boy, it can wreak havoc with the rest of the day.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
I'm going to set the bar high, my friend.
I'm excited.
Cool. Me too.
And, there's a couple questions about where folks can follow the two of you on the Twitters. I'm going to drop those links into chat for folks to be able to follow. Thank you so much. This was great today.
Really thank you.
A lot.
Oh, good. Hey, have me back anytime that you want. I saw some people saying I needed to come back. I wasn't sure on what, but we could do a whole hour on Agile as well. I've been doing that talk a lot lately. I went to SAP in Germany, and I did an Agile talk for their closing of something called DCOM. And then when I came to the United States, they had me in their main primary keynote because of what I said in Germany about Agile. Yeah, it was like, we need that guy to say this in front of everybody. Let's get him to do it again. So I just did like a little intro there. But I've been doing a lot of Agile talks lately because I go in my customers and they say, Donovan, we want you to talk about DevOps. And then I talk about it and they realize, holy crap, we're not ready for that because we're not producing high quality pieces of code. I'm like, yeah, rushing crap into production is still crap, right? Crap shipped fast is still crap. So you need to be producing high volumes of producible, like what is it, a unit of shippable software or potentially shippable software. That's the agile discussion. And because I'm a certified Scrum Master and I did it for 7 years before joining Microsoft, I'm now going back and having these really deep, like agile discussions on are you doing agile correctly? And very few people actually are. You start asking them questions, you realize they're skipping daily stand-ups. They only do sprint reviews when they have something to show. They drop this other meeting because they didn't understand the purpose of it. I'm like, well, then you're not agile. So stop saying agile doesn't work when you've never done agile a day in your life. So let's talk about doing it right and seeing the benefits that you can get. And you think I'm passionate about DevOps? Don't get me started on agile. It's even worse. It's like,
it makes sense to me that the new tooling that we have today around the DevOps pipelines and the instrumentation is simply able to quickly reveal the quality problems you have in code.
Absolutely. And why am I going to ship crap fast, right? It's not good, right? It's like what you need to be doing is producing an increment of shippable software, high quality software. And we talked about it a little bit earlier about you want to design the quality into the product and not bolt it on after. The reason you bolt it on after is because your QA team's not even involved in your agile process, right? They're this redheaded stepchild that the dev team that's doing agile throws these black boxes of code over to them and says, ship it because we're at the end of our sprint, never given the time to test it. And when they say, when are you going to be done, but you haven't talked to QA yet, you have no idea when you're going to get done because you needed to have, how long is it going to take us to test this? How long is it going to take us to validate this? And that's not even in your pipeline. Are you serious? I was like, so yeah, I completely blow up all your ideas of what you thought agile was when we do that talk, which is, it's a lot of fun because having done it for so long, I have so many anecdotes of what not to do. And I tell you those stories and people are like, they're kind of half laughing because
that's us.
But they're doing the same thing. Exactly. They're like, that's us. I'm like, yeah, I know. So I'm gonna tell you a story about this other company, but yeah, you're gonna see a lot of similarities between them and you. Don't do that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that was a very quick 2 hours.
My goodness. Yes.
Was it? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Time flies when you're having fun.
I guess it does. Wow.
Lots to show.
Well, thank you so much, Donovan. This was great. We're gonna take the recording of this. We're gonna make it available on the DEVintersection website, so other folks who perhaps didn't see this, and if you didn't see this live, you didn't get a chance to ask questions, we're gonna give you a link back to the DEVintersection channel so you can watch next time we're live. We've got a bunch of these shows queued up here throughout the month of February, leading into the event.
Awesome.
So we're really excited.
Yeah. Lots of topics. Digging more into Visual Studio. We've got a couple of interesting AI conversations coming up as well. And some of the other new stack bits for .NET Core.
Yeah. So thank you again, Donovan. And we'll see you folks out there next time.
Take care.
All righty. And I've got a closing scene. All right. Goodbye.
Bye.